Have you ever felt that life is sending you the same lessons over and over again? As if the universe is trying to communicate with you through recurring problems, difficult relationships, or situations that seem to follow you, no matter how much you try to avoid them. Take a moment and ask yourself, what are you ignoring? What message are you refusing to hear? Because according to Carl Jung, one of the deepest and most revolutionary psychologists in our history, the universe doesn't stop sending you signals until you finally pay attention to them. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This quote from Jung reveals a truth that few dare to confront. Many of our problems are simply messages from the unconscious that manifest as obstacles because we refuse to listen to them. Think about it for a moment. That soul-draining job you keep clinging to, that relationship you know doesn't nourish you but you're afraid to end, those patterns that repeat in your life like an endless echo. What if all of these weren't punishments from destiny but attempts from your own psyche to guide you toward the life you truly want to live? Jung discovered that our unconscious is not a simple repository of forgotten memories. It's a living, intelligent force that constantly seeks our integration and fulfillment. When we ignore its messages, when we resist its signals, that's when obstacles, crises, and suffering appear. Imagine this. You're in a dark room, trying to find the exit. You walk blindly, constantly stumbling over the same objects. You could blame the room for being poorly designed, or you could turn on a light and clearly see what's in front of you. Jung's work invites us precisely to turn on that light, to illuminate what we don't want to see. What happens when you finally pay attention to these messages? When you decide to listen to what your unconscious is trying to communicate, something extraordinary occurs. Obstacles begin to transform into opportunities. Crises become turning points toward a more authentic life. Suffering transforms into growth. For Jung, everything that disturbs us externally is a reflection of something we haven't resolved internally. He called this the shadow, those parts of ourselves that we have repressed, denied, or rejected. And the more we try to run from our shadow, the more forcefully it will manifest in our daily life. Think about that person who deeply irritates you. What exactly is it about them that bothers you? Jung would say that those qualities that irritate you so much are aspects of yourself that you haven't accepted or integrated. This isn't something mystical or esoteric. It's a psychological mechanism that Jung called projection. We project onto others what we cannot or do not want to recognize in ourselves. Do you remember any situation in your life that seemed absolutely unbearable, and yet years later you recognized as a crucial point of growth? That's the wisdom of the unconscious, working through obstacles. The universe doesn't send you problems to punish you. It sends them to awaken you. But how do we learn to listen to these messages before they become major crises? Jung developed several techniques to establish a dialogue with the unconscious. One of the most powerful is attention to dreams. For Jung, dreams aren't simply mental waste. They're direct messages from the unconscious, communicated in a symbolic language that we must learn to interpret. Another crucial sign is synchronicities, those seemingly casual events that have a profound meaning. When you start noticing patterns, significant coincidences, or encounters that seem too timely to be chance, the unconscious is trying to communicate with you. And then there are emotions. Those discomforts, anxieties, or irritations you feel in certain situations aren't simply random reactions. They're emotional compasses indicating where you need to pay attention. Jung noticed something fascinating. When we ignore these subtle signals, the unconscious raises the volume. What began as a mild intuition can turn into a physical illness, a relationship crisis, or a professional collapse. Not because there's some malevolent force, but because your own being is trying to redirect your path toward authenticity. Let me tell you something Jung observed in his clinical practice over decades. Those patients who learned to listen to and follow the messages from their unconscious experienced not just an improvement in their symptoms, but a complete transformation of their life perspective. What Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, begins precisely when you start to heed these calls from the universe. Have you ever wondered why you sometimes make decisions that you rationally know aren't good for you? Jung discovered that this happens when your ego, the conscious part of your mind, is disconnected from yourself, your psychic totality. Obstacles appear precisely to re-establish this connection, to remind you who you truly are beyond the masks you've adopted. A powerful example of this is what Jung called the midlife crisis. Many people, after achieving the external success that society promised would bring happiness, a good job, a family, material possessions, find themselves deeply unsatisfied. This crisis isn't a failure, but a call to a deeper and more meaningful life. The unconscious, through dissatisfaction, depression, or even physical illness, is shouting at you, "There's more for you than this. Your soul needs something different to flourish." Jung observed that many of his patients had followed the path that their parents, culture, or society had traced for them, ignoring their own unique desires and talents. Obstacles appeared precisely when this betrayal of the true self became unsustainable. The unconscious, like a faithful guardian of our authenticity, begins to sabotage what's not aligned with our essence. Think about your own life. How many times have you followed a path simply because it was expected, safe, or approved by others? And how many times have you encountered mysterious obstacles precisely on those paths? This isn't coincidence. It's your psyche trying to reconnect you with your deepest truth. One of Jung's most revolutionary teachings is that the unconscious contains not only our fears, traumas, and rejected parts, it also harbors our greatest potential. He called this the treasure hard to attain. The obstacles we face are, in many cases, guardians of this inner treasure. Have you noticed how some people seem to flourish after facing great adversities? Jung would explain that this happens because the crisis forced them to find internal resources they didn't know they had. The obstacles didn't come to destroy them, but to reveal their true strength and purpose. There's something deeply liberating about this perspective. It means that nothing in your life has been in vain. Every difficult relationship, every failure, every loss, all have been messengers carrying crucial lessons for your evolution. The question isn't, why is this happening to me, but what is this trying to teach me? Jung discovered that when we change our relationship with obstacles, when we move from resistance to curiosity, something magical happens. The energy we previously spent fighting against reality becomes fuel for our transformation. One of the most fascinating aspects of Jung's work is his understanding of archetypes, those universal patterns that inhabit our collective unconscious. When we face significant obstacles, we're often living out an archetypal pattern larger than ourselves. For example, the hero archetype manifests when we face challenges that seem impossible, but, when overcome, fundamentally transform us. The orphan archetype appears when we feel abandoned by what we trusted. The sage archetype emerges when we finally understand the lesson the obstacle came to teach us. Recognizing these patterns helps us see our problems as part of the shared human experience, not as personal punishments or signs of our insufficiency. Obstacles are no longer simply bad things that happen to us. They are invitations to live our own archetypal story. Jung noticed that our greatest obstacles often reflect unintegrated polarities in our psyche. If you find yourself constantly in relationships where you're not valued, it might be because you haven't integrated your own capacity for self-valuation. If you attract situations where others control you, perhaps you haven't accepted your own power. This understanding leads us to one of Jung's most powerful teachings, the integration of opposites. For Jung, psychic totality involves reconciling seemingly contradictory aspects of our personality. Obstacles often point to where this integration hasn't occurred. Have you found yourself repeating the same painful patterns over and over? Jung called this the compulsion to repeat, situations that repeat until we learn the lesson they're trying to teach us. When we finally understand the message, the pattern dissolves as if it never existed. This leads us to a profound truth. Obstacles persist only as long as we refuse to listen. Once we heed the message, their purpose is fulfilled, and they can transform or disappear. As Jung said, I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. One of Jung's most revolutionary observations was that the process of psychological growth isn't linear. He visualized it as a spiral. We revisit the same themes again and again, but each time from a deeper level of understanding. Recurring obstacles are simply invitations to this spiral movement. Think about those situations in your life that seem like more sophisticated versions of problems you thought you'd overcome. You're not going backward. You're being invited to a deeper level of integration and wisdom. Jung also discovered something crucial about life crises. They often occur just before an evolutionary leap in our consciousness. Like the caterpillar that must go through the apparent destruction of the chrysalis before transforming into a butterfly, we too face periods of dissolution before being reborn with a more expansive identity. This is especially relevant when we talk about obstacles related to our vocation or purpose. Jung observed that many people experience their greatest difficulties precisely in the areas where they had their most significant gifts, as if the universe created resistance to strengthen exactly what we're destined to offer the world. Have you noticed how your greatest talents sometimes come accompanied by your greatest challenges? This paradox, which Jung deeply recognized, reminds us that our wounds and our gifts often arise from the same source. Jung developed the concept of the wounded healer, the idea that precisely those areas where we've been wounded become the source of our greatest capacity to heal others. Obstacles, seen from this perspective, are initiations into our highest purpose. One of the most revolutionary aspects of Jungian thought is his understanding of projections. Jung discovered that what disturbs us most in others is a reflection of unrecognized aspects of ourselves. Relational obstacles, particularly, are mirrors reflecting parts of our shadow. Have you noticed how certain people seem to trigger your most intense emotional reactions? Jung would say that these people are acting as mirrors, showing you aspects of yourself that need integration. The obstacle isn't the person, it's the projection that needs to be recognized. For Jung, the greatest obstacle of all is our resistance to being who we truly are. Most of us develop a personality or mask, what Jung called persona, that we present to the world. This mask is useful for social adaptation, but it becomes a prison when we forget that it's just a role we play, not our true essence. The most significant obstacles appear precisely when this mask can no longer contain the truth of who we are. Like a pressure cooker that must eventually release its steam, our repressed authenticity will eventually seek expression, often through crises that break our false structures. Jung observed a fascinating pattern. Many successful people by external standards experience their greatest emptiness precisely at the peak of their success. Why? Because they had built their lives around values that weren't truly theirs. The emptiness was simply the voice of their soul saying, "This isn't everything, there's more for you." This phenomenon is particularly common in our modern society, where values like status, material wealth, and external recognition often eclipse deeper values like authenticity, connection, and meaning. Obstacles in the form of dissatisfaction, depression, or existential crises are messengers reminding us of our true priorities. Jung also noticed something profoundly important about relationships. Those people who affect us most emotionally, positively or negatively, are carriers of what he called soul images. They're mirrors reflecting not just our shadows, but also our unrealized potential. Have you wondered why certain relationships seem to have so much power over you? Jung would say that these people have activated deep aspects of your unconscious. Relational obstacles are, in this sense, opportunities to recover projections and reclaim lost parts of yourself. One of Jung's most revolutionary concepts is synchronicity, seemingly casual events that have a profound meaning. Jung observed that when we're in an important process of psychological transformation, the external world seems to reflect our internal world through meaningful coincidences. These synchronicities often appear precisely when we face obstacles, as if the universe were offering us signs, clues, and resources exactly when we need them. Jung saw this not as something supernatural, but but as evidence of the deep interconnection between psyche and matter. Have you noticed how in your moments of greatest confusion or crisis, signs, people, or information sometimes appear precisely when you need them? This phenomenon, far from being coincidence, is what Jung identified as the dialogue between your consciousness and the larger field of existence. Jung discovered that the unconscious speaks to us not only through obstacles, but also through our dreams. In his clinical practice, he observed that dreams often offered precisely the wisdom or perspective that the person needed to resolve their conscious dilemmas. If you're facing significant obstacles in your life, pay special attention to your dreams. According to Jung, the unconscious often offers us creative solutions that our conscious mind, limited by its partial perspective, cannot see by itself. One of Jung's deepest observations was that unnecessary suffering arises when we resist the messages from the unconscious. When we ignore subtle signals, intuition, dreams, synchronicities, they eventually come as crises we cannot ignore. Jung expressed it powerfully. Neurosis is the suffering of a soul that has not found its meaning. Obstacles seen from this perspective are calls to meaning, invitations to a deeper and more authentic life. Have you noticed how sometimes you struggle against situations that, in retrospect, were exactly what you needed to grow? Jung would say this resistance is natural. The ego desires to maintain control and comfort. But the soul desires expansion, even if that means going through discomfort. For Jung, the true purpose of obstacles isn't to punish or limit us, it's to expand our consciousness. Each crisis, each challenge, each loss invites us to include more reality in our understanding. As he said himself, there is no birth of consciousness without pain. This expansion process is what Jung called individuation, the path to psychic totality. It's not a path of perfection, but of completeness, integrating both our lights and our shadows into a more authentic and complete personality. Obstacles seen from this perspective aren't enemies, but allies on our path to individuation. They're signs that we're evolving, that our consciousness is expanding beyond its previous limits. Jung observed something fascinating. People who most resisted their internal processes often faced their obstacles in externalized form, as physical illnesses, accidents, or external crises. As if the body or the material world had to manifest what consciousness refused to recognize. This leads us to a revolutionary understanding. Many of our external obstacles are actually internalized processes materialized. The universe isn't conspiring against us, it's responding to our inner state. Have you noticed how your external circumstances often reflect your inner state? Jung considered this correspondence not as a coincidence, but as evidence of the fundamental unity between psyche and world. One of Jung's most important discoveries was the transformative power of consciously facing our shadows. He observed that when we have the courage to look directly at what we most fear or reject in ourselves, those aspects lose their destructive power and become sources of strength. Obstacles in this sense are opportunities for shadow encounters. Each difficult situation invites us to recognize aspects of ourselves that we've denied or repressed. Have you ever experienced how, after finally admitting a fear or weakness, you feel paradoxically lighter and stronger? Jung would explain that this happens because the energy you spent on repression is now available to you. Jung also discovered something crucial about psychological time. The unconscious doesn't operate in linear time. For our deep psyche, past, present, and future are interconnected. Current obstacles are often related not only to our past, but to our potential future seeking to manifest. This means that the challenges we face today may be preparations for what we're destined to become. Like seeds of our future self that need the soil's resistance to germinate and grow. Have you noticed how some of your past difficulties prepared you precisely for your greatest present contributions? This Jungian perspective invites us to see our obstacles not just as results of our past, but as invitations to our future. Jung developed the concept of the transcendent function, that capacity of the psyche to create a third possibility that transcends seemingly irreconcilable opposites. When we face obstacles that seem to present us with only impossible options, the transcendent function offers us a creative way out that we couldn't initially see. This capacity doesn't arise from the rational mind, but from the depths of the psyche, especially when we have the courage to remain in the tension of opposites without seeking premature resolutions. Have you experienced moments where, after struggling with a seemingly unsolvable problem, an understanding suddenly emerges that transcends the duality that had you trapped? Jung would say you've experienced the transcendent function in action. For Jung, the greatest obstacle we face is our own conditioned mind, those beliefs, assumptions, and patterns we've unconsciously adopted from our family, culture, and society. These conditionings keep us in invisible boxes that limit our experience of reality. External obstacles often reflect these internal limits, inviting us to question not just our circumstances, but our perception of what's possible. Have you noticed how some people face devastating circumstances and create extraordinary lives, while others are paralyzed by minor challenges? Jung would say the difference isn't in the obstacles themselves, but in the mental maps through which we interpret our experience. One of Jung's deepest observations was that the psyche, like nature, seeks balance. When we become too one-sided, too rational at the expense of the intuitive, too disciplined at the expense of spontaneity, too focused on the exterior at the expense of our inner life, the unconscious creates obstacles that force us to recover balance. These seemingly negative obstacles are, from this perspective, expressions of the self-regulating wisdom of our total psyche. Have you noticed how sometimes life seems to force you to slow down precisely when you're too busy, or how emotional crises arise when you've been too much in your head? These aren't accidents. They're attempts by your inner being to restore wholeness. Jung also noticed that the most significant obstacles often appear in moments of transition between life stages, as if the universe demands that we complete the psychological work of one stage before allowing us to genuinely advance to the next. These transition crises are especially common in middle age, when many people find themselves questioning fundamental decisions they made in their youth based on external expectations rather than authentic desires. Have you experienced periods of intense difficulty just before evolving significantly as a person? Jung would recognize this pattern as the natural process of psychological death and rebirth that accompanies all authentic transformation. One of Jung's most valuable contributions was his understanding of how different personalities face obstacles differently. He developed psychological typology, which later influenced systems like the MBTI, to help us recognize that we don't all process experience the same way. Some types face obstacles through logical analysis, others through values and feelings, others through direct action, and others through exploration of possibilities. Recognizing your psychological type can help you understand why certain obstacles particularly challenge you. Have you noticed how some people seem naturally equipped to solve problems that you find especially difficult? Jung would explain that this reflects our different cognitive functions and attitudes toward experience. Jung discovered that the true potential for transformation lies not in avoiding obstacles, but in consciously relating to them. He developed techniques like active imagination, a conscious dialogue with figures from the unconscious, to help us extract the wisdom contained in our challenges. When we learn to dialogue with our obstacles instead of simply reacting to them, we discover that even the most painful experiences contain seeds of growth and wisdom. Have you ever tried asking a problem what it's trying to teach you, as if the problem itself were a teacher? This perspective, deeply Jungian, transforms our relationship with obstacles from adversaries to teachers. For Jung, the ultimate purpose of obstacles isn't simply to teach us specific lessons, but to guide us toward a more conscious relationship with the totality of existence. What he called the self, the organizing center of the psyche that transcends but includes the ego. The deepest obstacles are invitations to recognize that we are more than our limited identities, more than our personal histories, more than our achievements and failures. Have you experienced moments where, amid great difficulties, you felt a presence or wisdom greater than your usual identity? Jung would recognize this as an encounter with the self, that dimension of your being that transcends the limits of personality. One of the most significant patterns Jung observed was that obstacles often appear when we're ready to evolve, though we may not consciously know it. As if a wiser part of us created the necessary conditions for our next evolutionary step. These obstacles aren't punishments for our past mistakes, but invitations to our future potential. They're the universe saying, it's time for you to become more than you've been until now. Have you noticed in retrospect how certain difficult periods seemed perfectly designed to prepare you for what came after? Jung would recognize this as the teleology of the unconscious, its purposive movement toward completeness. Finally, Jung discovered that our relationship with obstacles reflects our relationship with life itself. When we see challenges as enemies to avoid, we miss the invitation to a deeper and more meaningful life. When we recognize them as teachers and guides, each difficulty becomes a stepping stone to greater wisdom. As Jung himself wrote, the most intense experience of the totality is the individual when he confronts the absolute power of fate. It's precisely in our most difficult moments that we have the opportunity to experience the full depth of what it means to be alive. Are you willing to see your obstacles not as impediments to your happiness, but as guardians of your transformation? Are you ready to hear what the universe has been screaming at you? The path isn't easy. It requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to face both your lights and your shadows. But as Jung discovered in his own life, and in that of hundreds of patients, the reward is an infinitely richer, more authentic, and more meaningful existence. You're not alone on this journey. Thousands of people at this very moment are awakening to the same understanding, that obstacles aren't their enemies, but their greatest teachers. Together we're rediscovering what Jung knew, that the universe isn't against us, but deeply in favor of our evolution and fulfillment. If this message has resonated with you, take it as a synchronicity, a sign that you're ready for a more conscious relationship with the obstacles in your life. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Leave me a comment sharing what obstacle in your life you might start seeing as a teacher instead of an enemy. Remember, the universe screams with obstacles what you refuse to hear. Not because it wants to punish you, but because it longs for you to awaken to the greatness that already exists within you. And when you finally listen, you discover that each obstacle has been a stepping stone on your path to the person you were meant to be. If this message has impacted you, give it a like and subscribe for more content that helps you transform your obstacles into opportunities. Your journey matters, and your transformation inspires others to face their own challenges with courage and wisdom. Together, we're remembering what Jung taught us, that our greatest obstacles contain our greatest treasures. What you're experiencing right now, that seemingly insurmountable obstacle, that situation that keeps you up at night, it hasn't come into your life by accident. According to Jung, it's perfectly designed for your specific evolution, to guide you exactly where you need to go. Think about it for a moment. How many times have you looked back and realized that your greatest difficulties became your greatest blessings? That relationship that ended painfully freed you to find a deeper love. That job you lost pushed you toward your true vocation. That health crisis taught you to value every moment. Jung discovered that the unconscious has a wisdom that transcends our conscious plans. When we resist the change we need, when we ignore the subtle signals, the universe raises the volume until we can no longer pretend we don't hear. If today you're facing obstacles that seem insurmountable, I invite you to change the question. Instead of "Why is this happening to me?" ask yourself, what part of me is trying to awaken? What truth am I avoiding? Where is this challenge guiding me? The greatest spiritual and psychological teachers in history, including Jung, have recognized that untransformed suffering is just pain, but conscious suffering becomes the catalyst for our deepest evolution. Your unconscious isn't your enemy. It's your most faithful ally on the path to wholeness. It speaks to you through dreams, through emotions, through synchronicities, and yes, through obstacles. The question is, are you willing to listen? Imagine for a moment that every problem in your life has a purpose, a message, an invitation. How would your relationship with the challenges you face change? What possibilities would open if you could see your crises not as punishments, but as initiations? Jung spent decades studying the patterns of the human psyche and came to a revolutionary conclusion. We're designed for constant evolution, for continuous expansion of consciousness. Obstacles are simply the necessary contractions before each psychological birth. I invite you this week to observe your difficulties with new eyes. Ask yourself what they're trying to teach you. Write down your dreams. Pay attention to synchronicities. Observe what emotions arise most intensely and what they might be trying to communicate to you. The universe has been screaming at you, not because it wants to hurt you, but because it sees your potential even when you can't see it. Each obstacle is an invitation to a more authentic, powerful, and free version of yourself. Don't forget to hit the bell to receive notifications of new videos. If this content has resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Leave in the comments what your greatest obstacle has been and what message you think it might be trying to communicate to you. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read right now. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. Millions of people worldwide are awakening to the same understanding that our greatest challenges are actually our greatest teachers. As Jung said, "I am not what has happened to me. I am what I choose to be." See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the depths of the human psyche and deciphering the messages the universe is trying to communicate to us. Until then, remember to listen carefully, because the universe's screams are actually whispers from your own soul, guiding you to the home of your true self.